Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Victoria Fritz with the latest headlines for viewers here in the UK and around the world. Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is taken to hospital unconscious after he was shot while giving a speech in Western Japan. Hello there. Let's start with the news that has broken in the last hour. The former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been taken to hospital after apparently being shot while delivering a speech in the city of Nara in Western Japan. He is said to be unconscious. Local media reports say a sound like a gunshot was heard at the time. A male suspect has been detained. Let's bring in our correspondent in Tokyo, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes. Rupert, these reports coming in the last hour or so, what more do we know at this stage?
Well, we know quite a lot more. We've got video from the scene and photographs from the scene. And what they show is that former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was standing on a street corner giving a stump speech. He's been doing this over the last few weeks. Elections are being held here on Sunday for the upper house, and he's been really all over the country giving these speeches. And then suddenly from behind, he was approached from behind by a man who pulled out a gun. It looks like it was some sort of sawn-off shotgun and fired at him twice. Mr. Abe then went down onto the ground. Clearly he had been hit. He was bleeding from the chest. His security team pounced on the man very, very quickly, but it was too late. He had already discharged his gun. Mr. Abe was then treated at the scene by paramedics and put in an ambulance and then taken to a nearby helicopter, where he was helicoptered to a hospital in the city of Nara, where he is now being treated. But the latest reports from there, according to local media here in Japan, is that he is in a state of what they call cardiopulmonary arrest. Now, that does not mean Mr. Abe is confirmed as dead, but it suggests that he is in a very severe condition, either close to death or we are waiting to hear that he has died.
You say that the man was apprehended almost immediately. Do we know any more about the details of the shooter at this stage?
We have got a name. His name is Tetsuya Yamagami, and he is a local man, a 40-year-old man from the city of Nara. He is in custody. He's been taken away for questioning. We know very little else about him at the present. Obviously, that's where a lot of attention will be focused. I have to say, this sort of thing is very, very shocking and very rare in Japan. Political violence is almost unheard of. There hasn't been a political assassination, as far as I know, in my lifetime. And gun ownership is very, very tightly controlled in Japan. So this will be very, very shocking to people all over the country.
And of course, Mr. Abe was Japan's longest-serving post-war Prime Minister. Yes, Mr. Abe is a historical figure. I mean, he served the longest term of any post-war Prime Minister, serving from 2012 until 2020. He led the country out of the huge tsunami, earthquake disaster and nuclear disaster that happened here in 2011. And he was a major world figure, bringing Japan back into things like a stronger alliance with the United States, moving Japan more away from its pacifist constitution, post-war constitution, and saying that Japan needed to be a normal country. He was known as a right-wing nationalist. He definitely does have political enemies in Japan, but he's also a huge figure in Japanese politics. And Mr. Abe, of course, coming back in 2012 as the head of the LDP, campaigning for a boost to the Japanese economy known as Abenomics, and making his second term back in 2012, in the end of December 26.
That's right. So, I mean, I think there were two big planks to his premiership. One was nationalism and rebuilding Japan as a normal country, as he called it. And the second was getting Japan out of its 2 decades of deflation and economic stagnation. And that is, as you say, that led to a policy called Abenomics, which was really a massive injections of from the Bank of Japan into the Japanese economy to try and get the Japanese economy out of the doldrums. It worked to an extent, certainly in the early years, 2012, 13, 14, it looked like Japan really was on the road to economic recovery. Less so in the later years. He also, he was a very, very strong proponent of the alliance with the United States. He was probably the closest foreign leader to President Donald Trump. And for that fact, I think he is seen as being, a tremendously important figure here in Japan.
And on that point, just news coming into us just now, the United States says it is saddened and shocked by the shooting of Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. This is from the US ambassador, this statement coming out in just the last few moments. It's sort of hard to understate, I guess, the importance and the significance of Shinzo Abe to international politics over many, many years.
Yeah, I mean, he's been a figure on the stage here in Japan since the 1990s, on the right, the nationalist right of Japan. And he's certainly one of the key figures in moving the ruling Liberal Democratic Party away from its sort of relationship, rebuilding relations with China, attempting to rebuild a closer relationship with Korea. And as I say, moving towards a more robust nationalist stance, rebuilding Japan's military. Under Shinzo Abe, defense budgets were put up. Relations with China and South Korea deteriorated markedly, but relations with other countries, what Mr. Abe called as like-minded countries with shared values. So he saw Japan as being, as being much closer to the United States, to Britain, to Australia, and to India, what he called the family of democracies. And he wanted Japan to see its future tied to those countries. He was a key figure in launching what's called the Quad, the group of US, Japan, Australia and India, a security dialogue which we saw meeting here in Japan earlier this year. So he is, in that respect, he is a big figure in modern Japanese history. He's also a very controversial figure here in Japan because of his right-wing views and his views on the Second World War. He is considered a revisionist. He has repeatedly visited the very controversial Yasukuni Shrine here in Tokyo. He did so before his premiership, and he suspended his visits for most of his premiership, but went back again after he had stepped down. And so that raised a lot of hackles in Beijing, in Seoul, in Korea, and amongst people on the left here in Japan, because he was seen as someone who was trying to revise the version of history that the rest of the world, much of the rest of the world, saw of Japan's crimes during the Second World War.
Thanks very much, Rupert. I know you will keep us updated as to what may happen next. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes in Tokyo. And if you are just tuning in now, just this breaking news, this news that's come into us in the last hour, the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been shot whilst delivering a speech in the Japanese city of Nara. Now, reports are that he was shot twice from behind, fell to the ground bleeding, and we understand from local media that he is now in a state of cardiopulmonary arrest. He has been taken to hospital. So this news coming into us in the last hour or so. Let's bring in our correspondent Mariko Oi, who is across this story and joins me now from Singapore. Rupert, our colleague over in Tokyo, was just saying just how shocking this is, the fact that there is no such thing really as political violence in Japan. I know you spend a lot of time on the ground in Japan. You know the country extremely well. Just how do you think the country is feeling right now?
As you said, it's an utter shock. My phone hasn't stopped ringing ever since the news broke. All my friends, family members messaging about what the latest line might be. The information is still very scarce. I was just reading an article by NHK, the Japan's public broadcaster, and even their article had some conflicting information about his conditions. Some media reports are citing the ruling party, the Liberal Democratic Party officials, saying that Mr. Abe may be without vital signs. Others say that he is okay. So still a lot of information coming in, but we are waiting for a press briefing to begin any minute now, and we'll be watching that, where I assume that someone from the ruling party may update us about his latest condition.
And just picking up on some of the points that Rupert was talking about as well, he's a controversial figure. We do not know, it's worth saying at this stage, we do not know what the motivation for this shooting may have been. But Shinzo Abe has not been without controversy over the course of his political career.
Indeed, he is Japan's longest-serving prime minister, but as you said, and as Rupert mentioned, he was a very divisive figure as well, and he still remains very powerful within the ruling party. He still has quite a lot of influence on the current prime minister, Mr. Kishida, as well as the former prime minister, Mr. Suga. I'm just watching the Japanese local media. I think the press conference may start any minute now, but according to reports, a man in his 40s who lives in the city of Nara where Mr. Abe was shot. He has been arrested, or he has been in police custody. So I'm sure we'll start hearing about what his motives may have been. But as you said, his political views have been quite controversial. He's seen to be on the right side of the Japanese politics, very nationalistic, quite frosty relationship with some of Japan's neighbors like China and South Korea. Also, he had a very close relationship with Mr. Putin, which he has come under quite a lot of criticism lately since Russia invaded Ukraine in February.
And of course, this is all happening on the background of the Japanese elections as well.
Indeed, on the 10th of July, so that's only a few days away now, isn't it? The upper house of parliament will go to the polls. So the country has been in the midst of election campaign, and that's why a lot of Japan's senior politicians, lawmakers have been on the street, campaigning, because they can't actually visit each household. They have to be making speeches on the street and so on. So that's why we've seen a lot of senior politicians on the street campaigning for those party members to be re-elected for the upper house of the election. I'm just watching Japan Chief Cabinet Secretary. That was the press conference that he held earlier. He said that he's still not sure of the condition of Mr. Abe. He has been taken to a hospital by helicopter. So we've seen that footage. We've also been seeing quite a lot of footage of him getting shot on the street in that city of Nara. Also, I'm just watching on a local channel there, the man who shot him being caught on the street straight after the incident happened as well.
Mariko Oi, thank you very much for your time. And as Mariko was saying, there is a press conference that is expected any moment. And when we do have those lines from that press conference, we will, of course, bring them to you. Just a reminder and a quick summation of what has happened in the last hour. The former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, has been shot. He was shot at twice by a man who did not move from the scene and was very shortly apprehended. After that, he has been taken to hospital. He is in cardiac and respiratory arrest. This is what we understand from local media. Abe, of course, Japan's longest serving prime minister, with 2 stints in office from 2006 to 2007 and from 2012 to 2020. We will bring you more on that news when we have it.